Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the opportunities presented by the JB Singapore RTS. Thank you to StarProperty for hosting this event. I think it's my job for the next 30 minutes to educate and entertain you on this quite interesting topic. So let's start with an introduction on myself. My name is Ryan Khoo. I am a Malaysian. I've been in Singapore since 2009. I'm a permanent resident in Singapore now. So I've been in Singapore quite a long time, and I'm very familiar with the Johor property market as well. So I wrote 2 books on Iskandar Malaysia, which are available in bookstores since for some time now. And most people consider me some kind of expert on this topic. I started off as a property investor back in Kuala Lumpur in 2007. I bought a number of studio apartments, and I think those days the property market was quite undervalued and you could buy properties with rentals of over 12% yield. I had a small portfolio of this, and that was how I made my first pot of gold. Later on, when I went to Singapore, I started investing in Singapore real estate as well, and also in Iskandar and Johor. So this property here is a strata office which I own in Puteri Harbour in JB, and it has given me a quite decent yield as well. So contrary to most people's perception, I mean, Johor is not that bad a place to invest. There are definitely pockets of opportunities there for those who know how to do it. So today in Singapore, what we do is we help a lot of investors in Singapore try to maximize value out of Johor and Iskandar, Malaysia. Okay, so today's topic is opportunities presented by the JB Singapore RTS. And I'm going to go through these 4 categories over here. So first of all is, what is the JB Singapore RTS? So if you look at it on a high level, the RTS is basically a train, an MRT, right? We like to call it the road to Singapore, a joke, right? So RTS is actually short form for Rapid Transit System, right? But I mean, to put it simple, as an MRT train, right? And the MRT, this train is from the Woodlands North station in Singapore, which is next to Republic Polytechnic for those of you who are familiar, right? And it crosses over the Johor Causeway and curves and stops at a station in Johor Bahru City Center, which is just somewhat across the Komtar JBCC shopping mall, right? And quite near the existing Customs and Immigration building, the Sultan Iskandar building today. Formerly, it was a car park, right? And that car park is now being turned into the RTS station. So this is what basically the RTS is. If you look at it from an aerial map, this aerial map is a courtesy of Ho Chin Soon many years ago. So you can see the light blue line basically represents the RTS link, right? And you can see some landmarks which I've highlighted. So the immigration building there in red, City Square there in green, right? And you can see the Woodlands North. This is the Singapore side station, right? And you can see in blue, formerly this is a car park, which is now being turned into the RTS station, right? If you look at the videos given by the MRT Corp, right, they have actually, this site comprises of 3 different buildings. One is the immigration building. A new immigration building will be built. There will also be a transport hub and the RTS station itself, which is the one with the red roof, right? So some key facts: the causeway between Singapore and Johor Bahru is one of the busiest in the world. I think equals to that between Shenzhen and Hong Kong itself. More than 350,000 people travel daily. This hits 400,000 as well. That's a huge number of people to cross the border between Singapore and Malaysia. Border crossings can start very early. I think all of you are quite familiar with the concept of the traffic jams here. Some people wake up as early as 4 AM to get to Singapore. And with the RTS, when the RTS, this fast train, is ready, basically a trip should then be reduced to just 6 minutes one way, right? From JB to Singapore or vice versa. And the RTS also supports a capacity of 10,000 people per hour, which is quite a lot. Maybe we could ask for more, but I think 10,000 capacity per hour is still quite a fair bit considering today's situation. Definitely an improvement from today's situation. And there will be a single immigration system, which I will cover in a bit more detail in one of my slides later. Okay, so some high-level notes, right? And of course, when is the RTS completing? We are looking at December 2026, which is about 3.5 years from now, which is not too far away. Construction has started. I will show you some construction photos later. Okay, so if you look at where does the RTS go to in Singapore, so Woodlands North, right, which is the first station where the station lands, right, the RTS station lands in Singapore. The Woodlands North Station is part of what we call the Thomson East Coast Line in Singapore, which today is partially in operation. If you look at my lines in circle, parts of this line have already been built and operational today, right? So up to Marina Bay, you can actually take a train from Woodlands North today, all the way to Orchard, and all the way to Marina Bay today. And this final part, right, that goes all the way to Bedok Bayshore, the east coast of Singapore, will actually complete somewhat in 2024, 2025. Okay, so this part of the line is also going to complete soon. So the interesting bit about this is consider the fact that when the RTS is ready, you can take a train from JB City Center all the way to Orchard and then to Marina Bay, and this should be done in roughly an hour or so. So in a 1 hour trip from JB City Center, right, to Orchard or Marina Bay, I think that's quite a big jump and something that is previously unthinkable. Previously unthinkable, right? A trip done entirely via train. Okay, so if you look at it from a Singapore MRT map perspective, this is the entire Singapore MRT map. Those of you who have been to Singapore, you probably a bit have seen this map before when you've been on the MRT train. So the red line, the green lines, right, the blue line, the purple line, all these things are existing lines. Even the circle line. Singapore has many MRT stations, and they've been operational for I think 20 years or so for most of it, right? So this Thomson, the brown color line, is the latest in the number of MRT lines. Right, and you can think about it in the sense that this entire Singapore MRT network will now be connected to JB, right? And the other way to look at it also, JB will now be connected to this entire Singapore network. So vice versa, people can travel from Singapore to JB easier, and people from JB can travel to Singapore easier, right? And considering that it's jammed already today, the demand is there. The demand is very strong for travel in either direction, right? And the RTS makes this possible. You become part of the Singapore MRT network. And in Singapore, wherever there's an MRT, property prices there tend to do very well. Okay, so some artist impressions of the stations. So it looks like any other MRT station in Singapore or in KL, right? This is the arrival platform, right? If you've been to Singapore MRT, it looks exactly exactly the same, right? And they have an immigration complex, right? That looks pretty much like an airport immigration complex, okay? But all these are artist impressions. We'll talk about actual construction progress later, okay? So a little bit about single immigrations. Some people like to complain to me, Ryan, but how do we fix immigration? Maybe the problem is in the immigration process. So what we're going to do in the RTS is the single immigration process. So what that means is, if you look at the numbers, you try and follow the numbers here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So you look at number 1, you arrive at the immigration building at this drop-off area. Number 2, you go to the Malaysian immigration first. So you chop your passport at the Malaysian immigration. Then you go upstairs, is the Singapore immigration. Then you chop your passport at the Singapore immigration there. So what we're essentially trying to say is that both country immigration will be in the same building. I repeat, both country immigration will be in the same building. Consider today how you do it. Today, we chop one side, we travel across the border, come down, queue another time, right? For those of you who have done this trip before, queue a second time for the second country's immigration, right? So by putting both immigration in one building, we are saving the queue time, right? And we are trying to make this queue process disappear, right? You only queue once for both immigration of both countries, right? So when you go up to number 4, you enter the RTS platform, you immediately take the train. When you come out on the other side, it's arrival already. There is no more immigration once you come out because you already cleared it on the initial side, right? So you immediately go to car park or the drop-off, right, 6 or 7, and you can leave to wherever you want to go. So this will also apply on the Singapore side. So when you come back from Singapore to Malaysia, the Malaysia custom officials, immigration officials will also be on Singapore, right, to process your passport there in the same building in Singapore. So the idea is both countries will have immigration staff on either side of the border to speed up the immigration process. This is going to be done in the RTS. In fact, they're talking about it now also for the current situation, right? And this process will also reduce the immigration queue time. Definitely is an improvement over what we have today, right? So this plus the RTS should reduce our travel time across the border by a lot, okay? So what are the benefits of having this RTS? So let's go through them. So number 1, Today in Singapore, there are roughly 1 to 1.1 million Malaysians working in Singapore today. The World Bank, this World Bank data is based on, it's a 10-year-old data. So actually today, I think it's probably nearer to 1.2, 1.3, right? Million Malaysians who are working in Singapore. Singapore only has a population of 5.5 million, 5.5 million. So if you think about it, 1 in 5, or maybe slightly more than 1 in 5 in Singapore are Malaysian. I repeat, so every 5 people you see in Singapore, likely 1 or more is a Malaysian, right? So there are lots of Malaysians in Singapore, right? As you know, Malaysia and Singapore cultures are very similar, right? So a lot of Malaysians are working in Singapore today. And if you look at the problem with Johor as an economy, or the problem with Iskandar or Johor Bahru as economy has always been connectivity. This picture says it all, right? Today we have connectivity problems between Johor and Singapore, right? We only have 2 border crossings, both of which are jammed or heavily trafficked most of the day, right? During peak period, school holidays, right? It gets even worse, right? You can't even travel the border. All people have, complained about 5-6 hour jams before, right? And this is the problem that prevents economic spillover from Singapore into Johor. So anything we can do to improve connectivity can only be net positive to Iskandar, Malaysia, net positive to Johor. And RTS is one of it. So definitely when RTS is completed, you will see a lot of economic spillover into Johor. Okay, and you must also consider that today in Singapore, a lot of Singaporeans don't drive. Cars are very expensive in Singapore. The certificate to buy a car certificate in Singapore today costs 100,000 Singapore dollars. Yeah, just to buy the certificate of ownership, right? We call it the COE, right? In Singapore, that is before the cost of the car. Okay, so car ownership in Singapore is very, very expensive. So a lot of Singaporeans don't drive. They take bus, they take MRT. They're used to that. So imagine if you ask the average Singaporean to go to Johor and do a queue like this, right? This is ridiculous, right? How many times can they go to Johor when the queue is like this? It's so bad, right? They can hardly make it a regular process when travel times are so long. If it takes you 3-4 hours to go from Singapore to Johor, 3-4 hours, you might as well fly to Bangkok, fly to Australia, right? For the same amount of time. So fixing connectivity, especially when majority of Singaporeans don't drive, is important, right? It's not only for tourism, it's also for business as well. Workers cannot travel if the travel time is too long. So since the border reopened in April last year, we have seen the traffic jams at the border happen again. This is post the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID was a period when the Johor Causeway was totally empty, but now when the borders are reopened again, we have seen Singaporean crowds return back to Johor in a big, big way, right? And as I said, right, this is one of the busiest border crossings in the world, right? The plan to have an MRT from Johor Bahru to Singapore is not new. In fact, this plan has been, decades old. I think if you see the 2013 Singapore Master Plan, this cross-border rail link to Johor has been planned for a long, long time, over 10 years, right? In fact, if you talk to old-timers, it's been 20 years, I think this thing has been discussed, okay? So this has always been the plan, and to have this link connect to the entire MRT station, the MRT system, right, in Singapore, which I covered earlier, okay? The other thing to take note also is that today in Singapore, rental rates have surged to a record highs, right? Especially in the past 6 to 9 months, Singapore rentals have gone up quite a fair bit as a lot of foreigners return to Singapore to work, right? And rental rates in Singapore have gone up like 50%, 100%. I mean, if you hear the stories online, some tenants are facing 100% or more rental increases, right? And it's no joke, right? The rental pressures have hit the tenant market very hard. So including those Malaysians who used to rent in Singapore, they are now pushed back to Johor out of Singapore because rentals in Singapore are simply too high. This has been benefited the Johor rental market. Johor rental market has also increased quite a fair bit. Do talk to your local Johor agent if you have not done so. And this is one story that will commonly crop up, which is how good the rental market has been in Johor in the past few months. And this is actually a direct spillover from Singapore, okay? And if you compare property prices, right, this is a chart which I'd like to show private condo prices in Singapore to the average condo price in Johor, right? And I'm using all this in Singapore dollars per square foot, yeah? Singapore dollars per square foot, I convert to Sing dollar. So the average Iskandar property, the higher end ones that we sell to Singaporean, typically is around 300 Singapore dollars per square foot, right? So, which is about 1,000 ringgit per square foot. And if you look at the price difference, it's huge. So what we're trying to say is that there's a lot of potential upside for Johor property prices when connectivity to Singapore improves. Of course, Johor price, I think, will not surpass Singapore price, but definitely 300 to 1,000. This Park Rosewood is in Woodlands, yeah. So 300 to 1,000 is definitely too big a gap, right? If the Johor prices can jump $200, $300, I think it's a big jump already, right? Simply because of comparison to Singapore property prices today. Singapore property market has been very hot in the past 2 years, right? Prices in Singapore have surged up in the past 2 years, especially, and a lot of sales, a lot of developers are doing very well in Singapore. So another comparison that we often have is to the Shenzhen, Hong Kong scenario. So Shenzhen was a city in the 80s, 90s that looked like this, and today Shenzhen has become a bustling metropolis. If you look at the Shenzhen scenario, one thing that they have is an MRT that links Shenzhen to Hong Kong, right? You can take an MRT from Hong Kong Central to Shenzhen in roughly 45 minutes, right? And today they have a high-speed rail, which is from Kowloon West, where you can even take a high-speed rail, 45 minutes you can get to Guangzhou. So that shows you how train connection improves property prices, right? And I think same as in KL today, right? Anywhere there's an MRT, property price will do well, property rental will do well, right? So this is a photo. Guess when this photo was taken, right? This photo was taken in 2016, right? This photo was taken in 2016. That's what, 7, 8 years ago, right? And this is the human gem that we have at the Malaysian immigration. This is the Malaysian immigration, yeah, the human gem that we face, right? And if I take another photo recently, it will look the same. So nothing has changed in the past 8 years, right? Unfortunately, in Malaysia, this problem hasn't been fixed, right? But of course, we're fixing it now through RTS. Okay, so take a look at this chart again, but this time I superimpose Singapore property prices on it, and you can see per square foot, right? Generally, what Singapore property prices are in Singapore, and you compare again to the Johor property price, which is about 300. You can see the huge upside potential, right? Just once connectivity is improved, because Singaporeans find Singapore property expensive, and Johor is a natural place to spill over. Okay, so let's talk about construction progress. Next thing you ask me, Ryan, so sounds good, right? So how is the RTS progress today, right? I'm in KL, I don't know what's going on. Can you show me some photos? So these are some photos. Okay, first of all is the agreement. So back in July 2020, our prime ministers, this was our prime minister, right? They have signed the agreement to build this RTS, right? And if you take a YouTube screenshot, this is from the Southern Corridor of Malaysia. They have fantastic drone shots of Johor Bahru, right? And you can see that this is the construction progress. The depot and the site right now, they are doing earthworks and I think the piling works on both locations, right? This is on the JB site screenshot. This was taken in February, right? If you look at the ones, this is from another angle from the other side. Similarly, you can see the piling works and the earthworks have been done, right? If you look at across the causeway, the viaduct construction has also started. Singapore side has also done a lot of work, right? This is the viaduct across the border. So Singapore side, this is some photos taken in Q1 2022, right? They're also doing piling works and earthworks. The Singapore station is underground though. I think I just want to highlight. So you can see this is the existing Woodlands North MRT, right? It's operational today, right? So if you look, as I said, this Singapore station is underground, right? This is the above ground portion of the immigration building, right? So they have this structure. This is where the car drop-off is, and inside is the immigration building. The MRT platform itself is underground. But yeah, and this is the photo of them doing the viaduct drilling on the Straits of Johor, right? If you look at the MRT station here, so basically it's underground, but it sort of comes out above ground over here where it starts to cross the Singapore, the Johor Causeway. Okay, this is on the Singapore side. The model photos. Okay, Singapore government has announced recently that they have already completed 45% construction point of their project. 45%. They have already awarded multiple projects in Singapore. In Malaysia also, I think recently we have awarded Sunway Construction to do some portion as well. So construction is ongoing, right? Everything's on track. We do see the timeline being met to complete this by December of 2026. Okay, if you like to see further videos of the MRT construction, you can scan this QR code, right? And you can go to my YouTube video where I show you some Singapore side RTS construction station progress on this. Okay, so finally I come to the summary and some final thoughts. So these two charts basically show the Singapore property price index, right? I think Malaysia has a similar one. This is the Singapore one for private condos as well as their public housing. And you can see that in the past 2 years, there's been a spike in property prices in Singapore. Now, to Johor, that's a good thing. Okay, to Johor, that's a good thing. Whenever Singapore prices go up, Johor prices will go up as well because there's a spillover effect. Singapore too expensive, so everybody run over to Johor as an alternative, right? For not only for cheaper property, you know, cheaper cost of living, cheaper cost of doing business, right? There's a lot of reasons for them to come over to Johor because of natural push factor out from Singapore. Okay, and I give you an example today. If you want to buy a private condo in Singapore today, what kind of money are we talking about? Okay, so this project called Seneca Residences is launched in Tanah Merah in Singapore, transacted in January this year for over 2,000 per square foot. This is not very far from Changi Airport, right? Somewhat nearby Changi Airport. And this one bedroom, 463 square feet, was sold for just over $1 million Singapore dollars. Okay, just over $1 million Singapore dollars. If you are a Malaysian and you want to buy this property, you will need to come out a total of 591,000 Sing dollars, yeah, Sing dollars, cash or CPF lah. If you're working in Singapore, you can use the CPF. So this is the down payment, the stamp duties, right? All included is 591,000 Sing dollars to buy this property. Okay, and that is a lot of money, right? Whether you like it or not, it's a lot of money. Now, if you were a Singapore PR, you don't have to pay this 30%, you will pay less. You only require 300 over thousand Singapore dollars. Again, it's still a lot of money. And take note here, you're buying a 1-bedroom only. We are not talking about 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom for your family. This is a 1-bedroom and you require 300 over thousand Sing dollars if you are a Singapore PR. And even if I told you had a 10,000 Sing dollar salary, right? The time it will take you to accumulate this 300,000 is also a quite long time. It will take years, right, for you to have enough savings, even on a 10,000 Sing dollar per month salary, right, to accumulate this 300 over thousand down payment, right? You can say, right, how about I buy public housing, right? The HDB flats that you may have often heard of. Yeah, you can buy a HDB flat, but HDB flats have a lot of requirements because those are public housing. They are regulated by the government, right? So normally to buy a HDB, a public housing in Singapore, normally you have to be a couple, right? You have to be married, and you can't own other residential property. So there are a lot of restrictions there as well. So what I'm trying to say is buying property in Singapore is expensive, okay? Expensive as in quite expensive. We're talking about global level expensive, yeah. Expensive, not like Hong Kong, but expensive like Tokyo, London, LA, New York kind of levels of expensive, okay? It's not cheap and requires a lot of money. I mean, only the highest income people, right, or businessmen who are doing very well only have the ability to buy residential properties in Singapore today. So it costs a lot of money, right? There's a lot of reasons why this high Singapore property price will then spill over into Johor Bahru, especially when the MRT is ready and people find it easier to travel to Johor Bahru, and the travel time becomes shorter. Instead of 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hour travel time, the travel time becomes under an hour, which I think is reasonable. Lots of people will start to consider to buy a property in Johor. Okay, of course, as I mentioned, it's not just the property prices, but also the cost of living. I think this is quite clear, right? Cost of living in Malaysia will be cheaper than Singapore, especially when you are working in Singapore. You have the Singapore dollar, you have the purchasing power, the arbitrage for you to be able to stay in Malaysia and use a lower cost of living there, right? So the question that I typically want to put to you or to summarize is ultimately, if the RTS completing in 2026 reduces the travel time, right, between JB to Singapore, what kind of price should JB properties be, right? And anything that you can buy in JB, right, that can arbitrage on this, right, once the travel time is reduced, right? Travel time reduction is very, very important because everybody will want to stay in a property that I can go to Singapore easily because my job is in Singapore, my business is in Singapore, right? I want to be able to access Singapore easily. And when the MRT is ready, the RTS is ready, this will be possible. Okay, so again, I show you this slide. Okay, this is my signature slide where you look at the Singapore MRT map, you have the property prices on top of it, you compare the JB property prices, consider that this MRT will complete in 3 years' time, and any property that has an MRT station completing on it should go up in price. So that's a logical thought process, logical assumption. So why JB properties will increase? Definitely they will increase, right? It's just a question of how much, right, when the MRT is ready in 2026. So thank you very much. I hope this presentation was useful and entertaining to you and you learn a lot from it. If you like what I have to share, do subscribe to our mailing list. You can scan the QR code here to join our Alpha Marketing mailing list. We do share a lot of news about properties in Johor, about properties in Singapore. You can get updates there. We also have a Facebook group called the Malaysian Investors in Singapore. You can join the Malaysian Investors in Singapore group there. We also share about news and discuss stuff there as well. My contact numbers are there, and that's my email as well. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed this session. Hope to see you guys in person soon in KL, Johor, or Singapore. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.